Hello and welcome to Legally Speaking with me, Tarun Nangia. In the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, when people are booked, can their ancestral assets be attached? That is the question we are asking today. This question involves a lot many cases and a lot many people, and that's why it becomes very important to discuss it further. It involves a lot of property, it involves a lot of businesses, and the impact that it has, we're going to discuss today. Will it have a very chilling impact on business and industry when such things are invoked against people who are accused of crimes? I have a very eminent panel to discuss this with me. I have senior advocate Vikram Chaudhary. We all know he's been in news recently defending the former Home Minister of Maharashtra. I have with me Advocate Abhimanyu Bhandari. Uh, we all know that he's been critical of the PMLA Act in his book that he has authored on the subject and represents some high profile accused in money laundering matters. I have with me Niharika Karanjawala. She is associated with Karanjawala and Company, a firm that does a lot of these cases involving money laundering accused. All three of them will share their experience today in a sense of these cases and their view on this. May I start by a round of opening comments by Senior Advocate Vikram Chaudhary? Uh, Sir, could you give your opening comment on this issue and your experiences in dealing with cases like these?
Well, Tarun, your show always comes up with intriguing and multifaceted issues which have far-reaching ramifications. And before I give my viewpoint on the subject, I must I must share one of the thought processes that is now, widely being shared all around by jurists and legal pundits all around. That PMLA Act has indeed become an instrument of confusion and chaos, and at times, I would say, anarchy. It has led to some kind of consequences which were unfathomable, and maybe the parliament never even envisaged those. The act has undergone about 125 amendments till date, and the major chunk of those amendments has been in the last about 5 years. In 1 year alone, at times somebody shared with me there were about 25 amendments in 1 year alone. So this kind of drastic amendments has indeed given rise to a situation where the provisions of the act are not being applied consistently, are being interpreted in a manner that is weird and at times discriminatory. The same department, that is Enforcement Directorate for the time being, which also will be a subject matter of challenge. Actually, whether those officers are really authorized or not, that's a different subject. But then this department itself has applied the provisions in a manner which is totally distinct and different from, say, state to state and area to area. So there is a widespread notion now that the act needs to be put in a smooth kind of a gear where everything gets harmonized. The act has a very laudable objective to achieve. It is very important for our country to have this act implemented in its true spirit and perspective, that there is no dichotomy, there is no discrimination, there's no arbitrariness. There has to be fairness in procedure, and also that those who have actually are the perpetrators of the offenses or the act of money laundering, their properties should be attached and they should be brought to book, no doubt about it. But the procedure has to be fair. Procedure is a handmaiden of justice. Coming to the subject in hand, that is what you said about the ancestral properties. The Act has defined the proceeds of crime to be very precise. So proceeds of crime under the PML Act are dependent upon a property, etc., which is derived or obtained from a criminal activity relating to an offense. So that offense is some other offense, not the money laundering offense. Some other offense which finds place in the schedule to the PMLA. And if you derive any property from criminal activity relating to that particular act, which is conceived to be an offense and which falls under the schedule, that property is proceeds of crime. Or the second word used there is in the, there is an alternative or, which is the value of such property. Such property is now a question of debate, and it has been settled by at least two high courts categorically, the Punjab High Court and the Karnataka High Court recently, that this such property, value of such property would mean the property which is derived from that criminal activity and none other property. And that section itself, section 2(1)(u), it is the proceeds of crime, which also uses the word equivalent value of the property, where the property is held abroad. So the two expressions, value vis-a-vis equivalent value. So when the parliament says that you have the property which is derived, that is proceeds of crime, or the value of that property, and then it says the equivalent value if the property is held abroad. That means that if proceeds of crime, say from a commission of an offense, say some money is generated, that money is taken abroad, some property is created there, so that may not be possible to say attach. So what you do is that you conceive equivalent value of the property which is held in India because you have taken it out. But if the property is not there, it is pilfered or it is not available, you just can't go and attach somebody's property which is equivalent in value. It may be ancestral property, it may be gifted to him ages back, it has no connection with it. There may be other stakeholders in that, for example, a residence. So I get a residence, say X gets a residence inherited from his forefathers, and in that the entire family is residing, but he has committed some act, there is no proceeds of crime available, you just can't go and attach it. So the Punjab High Court and the Karnataka High Court have taken a definite view that it cannot be. And Punjab High Court, SLP filed by the department stands dismissed in the Supreme Court. So whether that actually it amounts to ratifying the High Court order, well, that's another area. Mere dismissal of SLP may not amount to merger with the judgment of the High Court. There could be many views to that. But then there is Karnataka High Court judgment, which is now under challenge before the Supreme Court, and notice has been issued. So the matter is at large. Insofar as Delhi High Court is concerned, in Axis Bank case, the Delhi High Court has said that there are tainted properties. It has used the expression, which is the proceeds of crime. And then there are deemed tainted properties, because if you do not have the property, then you will go and even attach that property which is deemed tainted property. That could be ancestral property. So the Delhi High Court judgment again is pending before the Supreme Court. Supreme Court has ordered status quo. And then as we debated last time, there is a batch of matters now before the Supreme Court over PMLA. It's a large overall, and I think this issue will receive its due attention when the entire batch is argued. This would be one of the issues.
Point well taken, and a very good set of points shared by Senior Advocate Vikram Chaudhary. I'll go to Advocate Abhimanyu Bhandari. Now, in your book, as I mentioned in the introduction, you're fairly critical of the Act. This could be one of the issues that would have caught your attention. What needs to be tackled here?
So thanks, Tarun, for having me on the show. In my book, I have dealt with this issue in very great detail. And I've also compared the approaches taken in the US and the UK when it comes to attaching ancestral properties or properties which have been with the person whose properties you seek to attach for many years, and whether you can attach them. Now, as Mr. Chaudhary rightly alerted us, that the definition of the Act is, it says what you can attach is proceeds of crime. Proceeds of crime means any property obtained directly or indirectly pursuant to the criminal activity. So let's take a very simple example, and it's important that I treat it with an example to make things clear. Let's say one Mr. Sharma goes to a bank and takes a loan to run a company. He gets a loan, the company goes insolvent for whatever reasons. Tomorrow he becomes an accused because he is unable to pay the loan, and it is said that he used the loan for his personal gain and he did not use it for the purposes of the company, and therefore he defrauded the banks. So in this case, what is the proceeds of crime? The proceeds of crime is the money which the bank gave to the company. That money should have been used for the business purpose, which it was allegedly not used. So therefore the question arises, where has this money gone? Now, when you look at this money and try and find where this money has gone to attach this money, then you see whether Mr. Sharma has used it personally. So let's say this money was taken by Mr. Sharma into his own account, and then he bought a car with it. So I can understand you're trying to attach that car. But what is the problem here is that it is in many cases not even relevant. What assets that are being attached, no one is even seeing that the money which that asset represents was actually not the money from the loan accounts. So for example, Mr. Sharma may have a daughter, may have a son, who may have a company in which they have some properties. So we see attachments of those properties where the son of Mr. Sharma probably has nothing to do with the company. The company's assets which are attached has never actually, that company of his son has never received the money. But just because Mr. Sharma may be a minor shareholder in that company, or you may feel Mr. Sharma was somehow controlling the activities of his son's company also. So you go and seek to attach those assets also. And this is where it is going to hit industry in a big way, because that company's assets which you're attaching has nothing to do with Mr. Sharma and Mr. Sharma's affairs. So therefore, you are going on the definition of value thereof. And I think this is one definition which is the mother of all chaos in the PMLA litigation. The term is value thereof. And yes, we have the Chandigarh High Court decision, I think, which is very good. Yes, we have the Karnataka High Court decision, which is very good. But let me tell you, the watershed, the decision which was an eye-opener and which clarified what are the contours of the definition of value thereof, was a Delhi High Court single judgment called Abdul Balsharaf, if I'm not mistaken, upheld by the division bench. There the court said that value thereof is not a definition which allows you to have a roving eye and go and attach assets of anybody and whoever. So Mr. Sharma's children who have assets, let's say through a company, land, agricultural land, or whatever, you can't use value thereof to attach those assets. That's completely perverse. What you have to show is that those assets were bought by the monies which were given by the loans. So there has to be a direct trail of money even to come to that conclusion. But you can't use the value thereof to attach anything and everything by way of a roving eye. So that's a great judgment. And I hope that that judgment, in one of these batch matters which are now pending before the Supreme Court upholds that decision and says that it is mandatory to follow that judgment, because I think that will create it will calm down a lot of the chaos which the definition value thereof is created. That's point number one. Point number two, Tarun. The basic fundamental error we are making in this whole regime is this. We are treating this as a Proceeds of Crime Act. This is not a Proceeds of Crime Act. This is a Prevention of Money Laundering Act. What's the difference between proceeds of crime and money laundering? You don't just trace proceeds of crime. That's not the job. For that, there is that criminal ordinance amendment which says that any criminal court can attach proceeds of crime. Money laundering is when you take that money with an intention to convert that money into white money, or take untainted money and project is at tainted money. So there has to be a laundering. So the act is actually on the premise that there has to be laundering. But if there is no laundering, then merely tracing proceeds of crime is also not enough. This is an argument I make, and this is an argument where you face a lot of resistance, because, when you have these big cases of loan fraud, you already have the press, barging against everybody. Then you don't have it becomes difficult to kind of persuade. But if you look at it with a cool and a calm mind and ask yourself, this is not a Proceeds of Crime Act. This is a Money Laundering Act. So please, first you show us how was it laundered. So even if Mr. Sharma took money from the bank account of his company, which he should not have, and he just bought a car for self-use, according to me, that car cannot also be attached, because he's not laundering the money. That's proceeds of crime. Laundering is when he quietly converts that money, he gives it to a broker, that broker quietly layers that money and then buys a Benami property. That's laundering. That's where you're layering, laundering, and then you attach that. But that's an argument which will take more time for us to convince the courts to kind of agree to, I think personally. The basic argument, which I think we have seen in Abdul Balsharaf come out really well in the decision of Delhi High Court, is that, the term value thereof cannot be used as a roving eye inquiry to go around attaching everything. And Tarun, when I was writing my book, I went through all the standing committee reports. And it's very interesting when you go through the old standing committee reports. In 1999, when this act was for the first time being discussed in Parliament, none other than Kapil Sibal, senior advocate, at that time he was a member of the committee, and he raised this issue that this act may become an instrument of harassment of innocent people if you don't have the right checks and balances. Therefore, in 1999, the standing committee considered and said that you can only attach assets of the main accused persons in the scheduled offense, not anybody and everybody else's assets. But unfortunately, that amendment did not go through, or that amendment was then diluted. And now, now the way the act reads is that you don't have to be an accused in the scheduled offense to be an accused in the ECIR. So that has created another level of kind of problem. So what I'm saying is it was alerted, but frankly, I think we saw this act come into in 2005, if I'm not mistaken. On 6 June 2009, the guillotine fell when they took a bunch of all IPC offenses and put it all in the ED Act and gave it this kind of a scope and the breadth. I think that is where the real error was. And it's no point saying that, now attachments are happening. That time it was really, if you look at it, the act, the rules, and all the rigors of this act, which gives copious amounts of discretion to investigating officers, comes not now, comes way back from 2009, comes way back from 2005. So really, if you look at it, it's a complete instrument of harassment. It can be construed at, and therefore it is very important that a number of very neat and key issues are now pending in the Supreme Court. I think more than 100 matters. And it is high time that we get some clarity, judicial opinion on it. And, so that one knows. And even, you can't blame the investigating officers, because they also need clarity on law. Because if they don't attach an asset today, tomorrow you will blame the officer. Why didn't you attach that asset? So how any officer is supposed to know what to attach, what not to attach, with so much ambiguity? Therefore, it's important that we have some decisions of the Supreme Court where it is clarified what can be attached, what cannot be attached. But yes, Tarun, there is no way that you can attach ancestral properties. There is no way, using the value thereof definition, you can go around attaching someone's son's property, some daughter's property, because you feel, oh, this family has wronged us. That's not the intention of the act. That's not the agenda behind the act. And I think that it is high time we see that such attachments don't take place.
Thanks so much for sharing both sides of the spectrum. On the one side, you shared that if the asset is not created from laundered money, there is no case for attaching. But on the other side, you also empathize with the officers, saying that there may be some questions asked if they don't attach. So that's a dilemma which we look up to for our courts to clear. On this note, I'll take a short break. After the break, we have with us Niharika Karanjawala, who will share her opinion on this issue. Welcome back. Just before the break, we had Advocate Abhimanyu Bhandari sharing his views on attachments of ancestral property. Now I have with me Niharika Karanjawala. Now yours is a law firm, Niharika, that does a lot of matters for high value clients. In a sense, these are big matters involving big money. They face allegations of money laundering. Many eventually get acquitted also. But this phase where the asset is attached is a very troublesome one, especially if the asset is an ancestral asset. What is your experience of these matters, and where are we headed if we don't amend the act suitably, or if the courts in their own wisdom don't clarify that ancestral assets don't need to be attached?
Tarun, I'm so glad you asked me that. And I feel like this is like Vikram sir and Abhimanyu have laid out in detail, this is a very, very important issue, because this is one thing that will cause harassment, not just to someone facing trial, but to members of their families, to people who also have interests in that property. And I'm not saying this is where the agency is coming from, but let's say hypothetically, that might be something that helps the agency, because if you suddenly cause a great deal of inconvenience to everybody surrounding an accused, there will be all the more pressure for the accused to either cut a deal with you, to go easier on the trial. You suddenly have them under a barrel, and there is a lot of leverage you can use with them, but clearly it is not the intent of the act or the courts to allow the agencies to use this. And PMLA and the ED especially are an act and an agency that have a very, very wide range of powers, wider in some instances than any other agency in this country, which is why they have to exercise these very cautiously and very judiciously, and there should be a little bit of self-restraint as well. Like, for example, on the question of what can be attached, for attachment under PMLA, the director first and the officer so attaching first has to satisfy himself that this is proceeds of a crime, right? That is a prerequisite. Now, under the CRPC, conversely, you have no such prerequisite, and the Supreme Court has already made it clear. In 2018, there was a case called Innovative Industries versus ICICI Bank, where the Supreme Court made it abundantly clear that the Enforcement Directorate must stick to their own provisions and the PMLA provisions when it comes to attachment of property, and cannot segue into CRPC provisions. So they are clearly bound by this. Now, when the court has already given clarity on this, one would argue that technically there should not be a requirement for cases like Maltesh versus Directorate of Enforcement. As Vikram sir was saying, this is the Karnataka High Court case where the Karnataka High Court has said that ancestral property cannot be attached. One might argue that these cases should not even have reached the court. There ought to be no need for the High Courts or the Supreme Court to clarify this issue, because it has already been clarified, and this might just be a few instances of the agencies trying to push it to do their job better, right? And if they feel that that is in the larger interest of the country, that is how they carry it out. But this is something that I feel requires attention from all fronts. Of course, if the apex court of the country determines something and lays down a clear ruling on it, then there is absolutely no question there, and then things shut down straight away. But I feel that the onus is also slightly on the agencies to conduct themselves with a level of responsibility and of fairness. Your role here is to do justice and bring people to justice in accordance with what the Act has envisaged, not to make life as difficult as possible for an accused person, right? So I feel that from every level, the courts as well, the legislative process as well, and a lot of people argue that PMLA does require reining in legislatively as well. But even from the perspective of application, I feel a lot of attention needs to be given to how these are all being put into place.
Okay, point well taken. I'll go to Senior Advocate Vikram Chaudhary taking this point. If there is a Supreme Court direction with regards to attachment of ancestral property, do you think the issue is over? Or do you think the PMLA Act is such that it still gives enough leeway to the agencies to go and attach, and then nobody can stop? You again have to go to the court and get it vacated. Do you think it's an end if the Supreme Court issues an order, or do you think that the Act itself needs to be amended in a way that these things are clarified in the Act itself?
Tarun, it's a very pertinent question that you have put, and both my learned colleagues have actually elaborated on it to a large extent. Let me give you a different perspective now. See, every act that the Parliament enacts, there is a presumption as to the constitutionality of those provisions, and the act must be construed, the provisions of the act must be construed in a manner which is harmonious to the attainment of the objective of that enactment. Now, having said that, as I said earlier, if the act had to undergo 125 amendments, and every year there have been about more than 2 dozen or maybe more than a dozen amendments to be carried out, it speaks volumes as to how this act is going to be implemented and how its provisions are going to be effectuated. Now, coming to the most central issue, see, today's subject, we will devote it to only property attachment under the PMLA. But unfortunately, the Act itself, the PML Act itself, has very inextricably interwoven, interconnected both the aspects of crime under, that is the punishment for money laundering, the offense of money laundering, as well as the attachment of properties. So the property could be attached, which is just a provisional attachment, but it can be confiscated only by the court, which will try the offense under money laundering. So the offense of money laundering and the property attachment are inextricably intertwined. The definition of money laundering under the Act is the offense of money laundering. There is no separate definition of money laundering. Money laundering, they say, is Section 3, and Section 3 is the offense of money laundering. So an authority is constituted, which is called the adjudicating authority under the Act, to first confirm the provisional attachment. The Act envisages a chairperson and 2 members to be the constituting the body of that authority. Out of these 3 persons, one has to be from the field of law. Now, the previous examples and previous precedents have shown that one, the member of law may not be even part of the decision-making process or the decision rendering process. Or as of today, there is a single member body constituted, and that single member is the acting chairperson. So what are the provisions of this? There is I would say, large-scale resentment over this. The High Court of Delhi has asked them for clarification, and every day these proceedings are being challenged for being quorum non judice in legal parlance. Now, having said all this, that this functioning of the authority, and then there is a mechanism of appeal, etc. The whole substratum of the Act is that you will attach the property only when, under Section 5, there is an apprehension that this property is going to be pilfered away and it will not be available when it comes to, when the offenses, the proceedings culminate, there may not be any property left. It may dissipate. But more than once, there are several examples where the property is already attached. Say, for example, with the bank, it is on lien. There is a mortgage. You cannot sell it. There is an income tax attachment. You cannot do it.
Yes.
Or there is a court order restraining that you will not alienate it. Still, they will go, the directorate will go and attach that property. So the whole spirit of the Act is violated. So when you ask me, will it be fine if the Supreme Court does this or clarifies this? Definitely, the law declared by the Supreme Court is binding on all authorities under Article 141 of the Constitution. But the right to property, Tarun, we all know is not only a constitutional right, but it is a basic human right recognized in all jurisprudence all over the world. So we are talking with interference with somebody's property, and you can do it in the most, I would say, frivolous or arbitrary manner. It calls for serious mechanism to be involved. It needs, the court's intervention.
Point well taken. I've got 6 minutes to go very quickly. I'll take interventions from Niharika and Abhimanyu, then we close for this show. Niharika, very quickly, now yours is a large litigation law firm and the number of money laundering cases have gone up 3 times. A lot of people in the legal fraternity say that with the prosecutions happening at a rapid pace, a lot of frauds being detected, maybe the money laundering cases may go up even more. There are a lot of people who may eventually be acquitted, but that is completely another case. Can you share with me what is the fear in a lot of people who've been accused of these crimes of the fact that their family assets can be attached? It creates a lot of pressure. What is the problem here? Because see, when a businessman comes to you with your law firm, in a sense, is acting for it, what kind of pressure is created when they understand that their house, the assets they own in the family, which is held severally in the names of their brothers also, where they are a shareholder, if that gets attached, then of course there's a problem with the brothers there also. Can you share?
Absolutely. So, Tarun, as you can imagine, this is a very personal fear for people. It goes literally down to the question of, okay, if something happens to me and if I am during the course of this trial, if I am put away or something like that, exactly what is going to happen with my family? Who is going to care for them? It comes literally down to the point of where and how are they going to live, right? Now, this is one point that interferes greatly with someone's family life much more than any other law does. For example, it's not a question of your entire family being put on trial. It's not a question of your entire family being dragged through the process, right? If they feel that your family has not been involved in the crime, then your family should also not be negatively impacted by the state, especially in an unfair way. Whatever the courts decide. The courts ultimately decide from a fair and judicious perspective. But if it is being implemented against the letter and spirit of the law, then you're really putting people through something in a very unfair way, and it becomes a situation where the process itself is the punishment. Like you rightly said.
Before I go to Abhimanyu, one line answer from you. Are you in favor of the act being amended rather than a Supreme Court direction? Simply say Supreme Court direction in the shorter run, but in the longer run, do you think the act should be amended?
I do feel, Tarun, that in certain instances, there are certain powers of the act that are so wide ranging that legislative intervention is also required. However, of course, a ruling by the Supreme Court bringing clarity to things that the agency can and cannot do will be immeasurably beneficial in the short run, to bring a fairness to the process.
Okay, that's a point well taken. Abhimanyu, you've anyway said earlier that this act needs to be scrapped. Do you think a Supreme Court order will help?
Abhimanyu, you're muted.
Tarun, there are two things about it, and very quickly I'll say this. Act, of course, needs amendment, and there is a need for legislative intervention, like Niharika rightly puts it. But as far as attaching ancestral property is concerned, which is the topic that seizes us today, I'm sorry, the act is very clear. You cannot do that, and you should not do that. So therefore, and now we have a number of judgments from various high courts, and the judicial clamor to say that you cannot attach ancestral properties, or you cannot attach properties owned by different members of the family of the accused is very clear now. So therefore, I think that as far as Supreme Court is concerned, I hope Supreme Court comes out strongly in favor of those high court judgments, and therefore, clarifies that one should not attach any of those assets. Second, Tarun, even if you attach those assets, you can't take possession of those assets till the trial is over and the person is convicted. And the trial court comes to the conclusion that the property which you have attached is actually property involved in money laundering. The problem is that after an attachment being confirmed by the adjudicating authority, a person is slapped with a Section 8(4) notice, and they try and take possession of that. There is a very interesting Madras High Court single judge judgment which says possession means constructive possession. So even if you've attached it, you can't stop the person from enjoying the property, because yes. What after 7 years or 10 years, he is acquitted? What if the court comes to the conclusion, sorry, this is not property involved in money laundering? Then why do you want to ensure that the person can't use that property?
It's a very good.
So I think there is enough of jurisprudence. I think what we need now is we need Supreme Court to decide these issues and tell us whether those high court judgments are right or they are wrong, so that those judgments can be applied with full vigor.
Nobody should stop the accused from enjoying the property, even if it is attached. We hope the Supreme Court gives clear enough directions in this regard. We will like to do a follow-up show on this very issue, seeing the next round of prosecutions that happen under PMLA. As we all know, every second day we see ED, filing one or the other case, many of them against very well-known high-profile accused. So we will keep track of this issue, but I would like to thank each one of you for sparing time and joining me on this episode of Legally Speaking. I'm sure the viewers would like this show and the kind of insightful opinions that today you all have shared with all of them. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tarun. It's always a pleasure to be on your show.